some of you will know that we had a different talk planned for this evening. Unfortunately, our speaker had to pull out just a couple of weeks ago. And luckily, Mike Underhill stepped into the breach. Now, Mike is actually the events chair, or the chair of our events subcommittee, a small group of people who organise all of these talks. So if you have any complaints about our talks program, it's Mike you need to follow. But we more usually associate Mike with things like microwaves and radio frequency technologies. But tonight he's going to give us a talk that's slightly different. In fact, it's an update on a talk that he gave us a couple of years ago. As you can see, it's all about science and technology, but in a slightly different environment to the one that perhaps we're used to. And suitably dressed, I'll hand over to you then, Mike.
Right, thank you very much, David. Right, am I the right loudness? Yes. Am I coming through, David? Or
yes.
Okay. Right, rule of the game, 5 layers minimum. That's why, otherwise you get cold. So I'm getting too hot now, so I'll take the 5 layers off, and gloves and woolly hats or whatever, and that's the rule. If you're serious, and it is a minimum, so I'll take off my layers. In fact, it was a trip, but it was a little bit more than a trip for me, as we'll see as we go along. And actually just this, because we were on a ship, one of the Houthi-Gluten ships called the Fram, we lived in luxury basically until something happened. And then we all would rush out on the deck, and the advantage of this sort of clobber is that it's quite quick. So I could get my stuff on and get out and see the whales or penguins or albatrosses or whatever there was around. So anyway, it was a good thing to do. Right, somebody's happened. I've lost my microphone. It's inside the coat. Right, back on the air. Right, so let's get going. That was the trip. It was ultimate. They called it the ultimate expedition, and I think that was a fair description for many of us, probably all of us. And we were at the MS Fram, and we flew down to, well, went to Buenos Aires, and then flew down to Ushuaia, down at the south tip of Argentina, and then we returned. So that was it. We spent a day actually here, and then some more days in before and after. But the main trip was from Ushuaia to the Falkland Islands to South Georgia, and then various bits and pieces, quite a lot of various bits and pieces. I think we had 8 or 9 landings, and you'll see what about landings in a minute. We had 8 or 9 landings. Now, we didn't quite reach the Antarctic Circle, but I can tell you now that it's colder in Antarctic than it is in the Arctic, quite a lot colder. So it was interesting from that. So, look, what about Antarctica? That's one or two things. It's surrounded by ocean currents, and blue is cold and red is, well, relatively hot. So you can see that it is, and I've mirror imaged it on the right so that you put South America in the right place. Nobody seems to be able to understand which way round to place Antarctica on a map. It must be something to do with rotating around the South Pole. But anyway, those are the currents. Now the important point is to just note this bit here, the Drake Passage. that is, because that's where the currents mix and so on and so forth, that is pretty hairy weather, and it is pretty rough seas. Anyway, moving on, Antarctica is mainly ice. In fact, on the left you'll see the sort of ice around Antarctica. There's a bit more of ocean ice, but that's the sort of agreed boundary of Antarctica. But when you actually look at it with radar, then you will find that that is what Antarctica is. About a third of the actual Antarctica itself. The Antarctica, by the way, is about the size of the United States, twice the area of Australia, Bruce. So anyway, that is the area that is actually real land. Well, that's what would happen if it all melted. That's what we'd have. And right at the end, we'll see what will happen to us if it all melted. Anyway, how do we measure that? Well, it's been done in a rather clever technical way, technological way. The early techniques were radars, yes, radars, which consisted of a aeroplane with a long wire, 120 meters of antenna, with a Teflon drone on that, and it uses synthetic aperture radar techniques. In other words, as the plane trudges along, it takes lots of samples, and those samples are then all combined together to make a really nice focused picture, but just along the line, on that particular one, just on a particular line. That technique has been improved. That was at quite a low frequency. That was at probably in the 2 to 20 region. This long wire was used on that. Then these are the aerials, and they would be typically maybe sort of 50 meg, 60 meg something. Or you can have one which you can drag a radar along behind you, surface penetrating radar. Can't call it ground penetrating radar because it doesn't penetrate, it only penetrates the ice. You can use a drone, and you can actually use something a sledge, which you can drag along between on a snowcap. So those are the methods. Now, the nice thing about that is these records are made available to anybody and everybody, well, at least academics, but they are available. And the net result is that you can convert all those into the picture that we saw at the moment. 9 years worth of radar. Let's zoom this in. This is showing how it is built up, but at least 9 years, this particular thing was 9 years worth. I'm not going to run it the whole time, I'm just going to show you 1 or 2 points because in fact this particular picture didn't do the whole of it. It did it from the ground radar, and the satellite radar has since been added to it. But you can see it's pretty effective as to what you can do on the radar. So let's see what is going to happen here. That's the whole picture, and then you can get more detail in particular places. You can see the glaciers and so on that. You can see them in that way, in more detail. But let's press on. A few facts about Antarctica. There are a lot of research stations. You can see them on the map. Lots of research stations, and they are from many countries. And the many countries, it's rather low population density. Well, you'll see you can have 100 square miles or 100 square kilometers per person if you want. Whatever the big one, the research stations and so on. The cities, if you can call them that. But that is the main South Pole station, the Scott Adams one is the big one, and then we are going to talk about the peninsula. This is called the peninsula here in South America, and so we're talking about this bit and also up to there. So that gives you some idea. A lot of work. It's actually under a 50-year treaty. So I think one of the next maps, in fact, well, that shows the important work bases there, and research stations. But one of the next maps will show that there's, I think, it's after this fact, but in fact it's divided up. There have been claims. Argentina makes a great slice of claim, and that's why they wanted the Falkland Islands, because they wanted to have a nice big slice going into and then all the way around, different countries have got claims, but all of them have been laid on one side by this and that international treaty, which lasts 50 years. And goodness knows what will happen when the 50 years is up. I'm hopeful that it'll continue on in just the same way. People won't be very silly. So here are some facts. It's fifth largest continent, double the size of Australia, we've said already. It's got surrounded by this, what is called the Southern Ocean, surrounded by that, and it's covered by ice. We've had that. Least populated continent, we've looked at the figures on that. A research station, picking out one or two things. Yes, the treaty was, going back to the treaty, the date of the treaty was 1961, 53 countries, and it's so far peaceful. 18 countries regularly send scientists and researchers, it says there, and it's the highest continent. Antarctica is the highest average end elevation. Not many people know that. But it's all ice, or not all of it, but most of it is ice. Flora, there are actually, you can argue that there are three types of vegetation, or 5 types, depending on whether you're a botanist or not. But basically, the tundra vegetation, small scrubs, grasses, mosses, but lichens as well. So some people claim lichens on that. Wildlife, not many species, and I discussed earlier, not many dangerous species. So in fact, not at all. In Antarctica proper, emperor penguins are the tallest, heaviest of all penguin species. Unfortunately, I did not see any emperor penguins. They're lovely creatures. You better watch David Attenborough or somebody else to have a look at them. But they are interesting. There's a bit more on them in a moment. There are about 5 million penguins. There are an awful lot of them. So climate, the coldest, a few temperatures up there, won't go through that. South Pole is actually quite a long way from the sea, and it's on a plateau. It's actually 9,000 feet up. It's flat as a pancake, but it is 9,000 feet up flat, so it's a real plateau on that. The ozone hole, which grew in it's formed less than 10 years because of CFCs, these chemicals which of course it is getting better now. I meant to put in some figures for that, but that's a good news story. So it shows that some of the measures that one takes to improve the situation in respect of ozone is certainly working. 40,000 tourists from around the world visit Antarctica. It's an amazing tourist attraction, and quite rightly too. The Deception Island, we'll talk about that a bit later. Port Locroix, we'll talk about that a bit later. The Drake Passage, well, a little bit, but it was fairly hairy at times. And as somebody who's not a very good sailor, I managed to crack it without being ill once, and the secret was the moment you get up, you take one Stoogeron, and you do it every day, no problems at all. So I was doped up to the eyebrows on that. Land under ice in Antarctica, this is the other, I think it's another one, so it's really a little bit of a repeat of the other one, but there are some other interesting facts from it, which you can see. The land, this is the one which actually shows the land in more detail at various points. So it's zooming in. All this is done digitally. All this is done from the data which has been collected over years and put together. So it's really a marvellous collaboration, I should say, to be able to do this from all the data of the various radars, satellite radars and so on and so forth. That's all been put together. And you can see, well, there's the Bird Glacier, various other things. Now, it gets a bit boring, so I'm going to cut forward. So, here we are. Here's the map I was talking about earlier of the various people who claim parts of Antarctica, and you'll see there's a big, the British claim here, but it overlaps, I think, with the the Argentinian claim is actually further here, and so you know they overlap a bit. Surprise, surprise. So it's just as well we've got this treaty which sorts the whole thing out. Now, on the right-hand side, Antarctica has formed to what it is now over 130 million years. So the original picture of Gondwana, well, before Gondwana land, is here. And here are the various continents, and before they drifted apart, they all drifted apart into these positions in that way. So it's been a bit of a slow process, but it's interesting, and that's why it partly makes it interesting to, well, at the end we'll talk about ice cores and find out what happened at least thousands of years, if not millions of years ago. It's worth comparing the Antarctica with the North Pole, with the Arctic. And they are very, very, very different. There's no question about it. They're different. I've already said that Antarctic is much colder. Well, here's the Arctic Ocean. The Arctic Circle is shown here, and here is the Antarctic Circle, not a bit fuzzy, I'm sorry, but showing around here, and there's the North Pole. But you can see the area of ice during the summer, relative summers, are very much different from that point of view. And in fact, you can see that again in more detail here. The various September as compared to, well, if you like, March and September, February, and to get the seasons right. So you can see the difference. It's showing the sea ice. That's the ice which surrounds, not the snow which is already permanently there. But of course, Antarctica has got a permanence which actually the Arctic does not have. And the Arctic is certainly warming up a lot faster by many times than the Antarctic is. So this is the sea ice picture on that, and I'm just putting up a picture because we got this stuff from her. Camille Seaman is a photographer, a very good photographer, and learned a lot of tips from her. The MS Fram, the boat itself, very interesting boat. Here it is. It's got some interesting features. There's a couple of pictures of it. Tonnage, 12,700 GT. Length, 114. Beam, 20 and a bit. Decks, 8. Ice class 1B. I'm not sure what that means, but it means it can bump a few lifeboats about. Not too many. Capacity 400 passenger, 280 berths. Well, actually, we were, I forget the exact numbers, but we had essentially as many crew as we had passengers. We were just over 100, about 160. Now that was a good thing, because we'll see why. Don't go on a ship or a boat which has got too many people on, because you won't get to see Antarctica. You won't be able to touch it. You won't be able to get up. There won't be enough ways of getting onto it. So that was a good thing. One or two other features on that was diesel, electric. The new ones, I think, are all electric. The new ones. Roll stabilizers, only 10 to 1 roll reduction. So in fact, it would reduce it 10 to 1. But there was actually, on one occasion when we were going through the Drake Passage, there was a real tough, real gale of a side wind. Now inside it was, you wouldn't feel it. The roll stabilizers stabilized the roll. The only thing is they stabilized it like that. So when we went for a meal, we were struggling up to get the pudding, and then you had to walk down to take it to your table. So in fact, the roll stabilizer not very, not in my view, not enough. But anyway, it was pretty comfortable. Had 3 radars, universal satellite navigation, and this is an important point which they had, which I went up on the bridge and had a chat with the captain. The roll stabilizer, sorry, the 3 radars and the satellite, they continuously depth map, and they upload it all the time to an international database. So if they take a slightly different route, they'll update what is down below from their depth sounders. So it's a real good cooperation on that. Satellite internet and internal Wi-Fi. The satellite TV, yes, that was out there. South American channels, that's the trouble. And it was mainly that. And the landings were from these rib boats, which we'll see a bit more of, the Zodiac type rib boats. And they carried aid. Now, it's worth a piece of history. Why was it called MS Fram? Well, it was after the original Fram, 1893 to 1912, which was a real innovative piece of technology in that day. It was one of the points. This is the chap Colin Archer. Yes, he was an expat. He went to Norway, and he actually was a shipbuilder. But what he did, the real thing, is to make a hull of a specific shape, and so that this boat was designed, as it says somewhere, the idea was that it would go into the Antarctic, get hoisted up, not broken apart like the Endurance of Shackleton, but hoisted up onto the ice, and the ice sheet would flow to the North Pole. So that was what it was designed for. And if only Shackleton had taken this boat, he wouldn't have had, his boat break up and sink and all the rest of it. He wouldn't have had that. He would have been able to survive in that way. So it was a real success of the boat, and it also had innovations. It started out with propulsion, triple expansion steam engine, 220 horsepower, but it also had sails. It had both, and also later on, although it was a triple expansion steam engine at first, it actually had a diesel engine, which to replace it. So in fact, it really was the leading edge of technology at the time. So quite a small complement, 16, much less than our particular boat, 200-ish. Now, first place we visited was the Falkland Islands. So we sailed over there, and this was in, I suppose you could argue whether Falkland Islands is in the Antarctic or not, you can argue that, but we went there and it was very, very interesting. And all sorts of little bits and pieces here. First settlement, 1764, let's pick out one or two other interesting things. Population, 2016, so 3,400, I think it's 3,600. And it was much less than that at the time of the Falklands War. Well, not much less. It was 2,800 or something like that. It's devolved parliamentary dependency under a constitutional monarchy. So in fact, it's self-determining except for defence, essentially. Somewhere it says it's defence and foreign policy. So, right, I think that picks out, but this here, the gross domestic product is from fishing licenses, top of the list. So they haven't got any fishing boats of their own, but they should, because the economic zone, the EEZ, is 200 miles, they charge anybody who comes into there a fishing license. And the whole economy is on that. So they've got, I don't think they've got any income tax or anything, does it say that somewhere? But anyway, the oil search not yet successful, that's actually moved on a bit from whenever this was done, 2016. It's moved on a bit, but it's still not economic. So there is still the issue of that. Tourism is probably the second most income that they get. Well, with only 300 people or so, I don't know, I haven't got the figures for the tourists, but probably a lot of the 15,000 tourists that go to the other places like South Georgia will have gone there. So there's tourism there. Sheep, well, it fluctuates up and down. It's an absolutely useless bit of land for sheep, really, but they do very well from that. So that's that gives the flavour of it. It's divided into two main islands which are not connected, West Falklands and East Falklands, and Stanley, the capital, is on the right-hand side here, and here is separate. And you need a boat or an aeroplane to go over there. We visited one of the islands up here. I can't remember it. We'll come to that in a minute. But that gives you some idea of it. So we actually did visit, and we started seeing penguins. But the interesting thing about these particular type of penguins, the Magellanic penguins, is they live in burrows, and they live amongst the sheep quite happily. So there they are. There's a penguin, there's a sheep, and somewhere there's a burrow, I think, there. Oh, here's the burrow. These are more obvious. The burrows are there. So that's they coexist quite happily. Now, the actual there is a shop. It's a mobile shop, and this Saunders Island shop. So that is as soon as some tourists turn up, then they drive out and they flog all sorts of bits and pieces out of the back of it, like the back of a lorry. It's quite fun. And there's a hotel. Here's your hotel on the West Falklands. It's used mainly by birders. Birders go there and then they can stay in the hotel. This is a farm in West Falklands, and we visited that. It's actually got a little airfield to one side. You can't see it, but they're a bit misty that day. And you can see they've got electricity, their own power supply from the wind. Lots of wind in the Falklands. Blown down all the trees. There aren't any trees in Falklands. There are bushes, but there are no trees. And they treat us very well. The thing I like about Ferty Cruising is none of this tipping business. It's all done for you, so you can enjoy what they produce, and they're very, very excellent afternoon tea. So there's some Gen 2 penguins in West Falklands as well, and You could see sort of, they're very gregarious on that, and they're quite interesting to look at. Well, very interesting, as you'll see in a minute. Here's the boats going out to land, to do a landing. That is my dear wife, and to actually very kindly organise the whole trip for me. It's always been on my bucket list, and it was nearly clobbered by a skiing accident. So when I was on the Falklands, when I was on the whole of the trip, I was pretty well hobbling about. Still much better now. Had a bad break in the skiing. But anyway, I can tell you, this is marvellous at airports. Get one of these and hobble, run and hobble, and you get to the front of the queue every time. So wonderful. Anyway, oh, by the way, that's the main road. That's the main road on that particular island. Albatrosses were really, really interesting. And the way they live, they have these stones, and they put their young on the stones, and we've got some pictures of that. They're very affectionate. You can see 2 pictures of that. You've got a very wide wingspan. Now, one of my failures was to not get a good picture of an albatross. So I had a new camera, which is a marvellous camera. I'll show you a bit more about it in a minute. It's pocket-sized, ideal for just putting in, and it performs marvellously. So the only thing is, it being small, it hasn't got one of these great fat sort of huge lenses which collects a lot of light. So when you've got a moving object, then it's very difficult to use a short exposure and get the whole thing right. And the brain in the camera takes over, and it says you can't photograph that. I could have done better when I learned to buy. I bought the camera just before going, so I was still trying to learn it. Right. We then moved after seeing a few penguins on there. We moved on to the eastern side, and we went to Stanley, the place, the capital. And that is like turning the clock back about 40 years. It's when did you last see when did you last see garden gnomes? Anybody seen them recently? They've still got them there, and they love them. They serve out the teas almost as good as the farm. The other interesting thing on the farm, in West Falklands, had a cup of tea. Thought, that tastes interesting, because there's milk in the tree. It was unpasteurized milk straight from the cow. Probably illegal in this country, isn't it? I don't know. But anyway, it was really, really nice. It took me back to being a child. Here is the museum, Cartmel Cottage, Falkland Island Museum, National Trust. Anybody got a National Trust card? Presumably you can go there and go in for free. But anyway, we were all taken care of. Here's the kind of thing, and think of it in the times of 1982, the Falkland Islands at the time of the war, the invasion. And inside, that's what it was like. Here's the sleeping accommodation with real rough walls. That was the kind of way they lived. And you can see some of the old things, mustard on the shelf there, the old radio grounds and radio, and the bread and bread things and so on. Marmite, well, you can still get that now. The pure ground white pepper from Crossing Blackwell, and so on and so forth. And hidden behind the cake was a little amateur radio kit. Now that, I talked to the guide, and she said that was a real godsend in the time of the invasion. They had, it was mostly the ladies who were radio amateurs, not so much the men, but they were, and they had a sort of secret network which couldn't entirely be shut down by the Argentinians. They did try, but they couldn't shut it down when they invaded. And it really was a godsend, and the news travelled faster on that than it did in any other way. They're very British, the Falkland Islanders. Remember the wars in 1982, there was a referendum there. And we've heard about referendums, and don't want to go there. But this one was rather interesting. 92% turnout for the referendum, and 99.8% voted to remain a British territory. There were 3, and nobody's found out who they were. There were 3 who voted against. It's an internally self-governing, as I said earlier, with the UK responsible with the defence and foreign affairs. Now, the interesting thing is when you look out from actually quite near where they had the last tea, you'll see on the opposite side of Falklands Bay the names of some of the boats which defended the war, the Endurance there, and Protector. They're in the white stones on the opposite side of the bay. And some of the houses really fly the British flag on their roof. They really do. They're very, very gung-ho British for that. They're very thankful. Now, I talked about amateur radio. They've got a high density of radio amateurs there, even the men. The men had the shortwave rather than the VHF. And here is a chap which I visited. I actually asked the guide, well, I've seen one of the aerials. Is that, is the chap that, oh, that's Mike Harris, I'll give him a call, you can call in. So I did. He had to rush off to the hospital for something else, but anyway, there he is with his setup. And the thing which is, you can see in here, his shortwave aerial setup, and there are 2 more there, and there was another one off to the left, which for a population of 3,500 or whatever, is a pretty high density of radio amateurs. So they're still doing it. Now, amateur radio played an important part in the Falklands, and I hope this will work.
We are here in the West End.
Now we're in trouble. I'm going to have to take this mic off and put it on here, because I haven't got it set up. Whoops.
We are here in the West End, opposite Broadcasting House. Let me explain why we're here. Up behind me is a building which is now the Langham Hotel. It's a very expensive hotel, but at the time, since April 1982, it was a rather roomy BBC office building. But up on the top, where you're looking now, there was an amateur radio station. Now, I am a radio amateur with the call sign G3UNL. On the 2nd of April 1982, I've been on assignment in the Middle East. I came into work and was met with scenes of near panic because the Argentines at 9:30 in the morning our time had claimed to have invaded the Falklands, and other than a rather laconic message from the cable and wireless saying we have new friends, there was no indication whatsoever from the islands. We had no confirmation, no news, there were no phones, no internet, nothing in those days. I was asked to go and try and use the amateur radio station, which is up on the building there, to contact the Falklands. Went up there and listened around for most of the afternoon. At mid-afternoon I heard a familiar voice, a fairly distinctive Falklands accent with a sort of West Country bird in it. And I realised this was a guy I'd spoken to a couple of times over the years called Bob McLeod. He was a plumber in Stream, about 50 miles outside of Port Stanley. I spoke to him and he said, Laurie, why is the BBC saying there's been no invasion? He said, there's an Argentine aircraft carrier in the bay, there are Argentine troops all over town, the governor and the Marines have been taken prisoner. The broadcast station's talking in Spanish, and basically it's all over. You've been invaded by the Argentinians. I then went on Radio 4 on the PM programme, there was no continuous news in those days, with this story. done shortly afterwards by somebody I thought was from the Foreign Office, but I think may have been from an intelligence officer, to ask what I knew. And I told him what I knew, that it was all over. And about 50 minutes later, Lord Carrington stood up as Foreign Secretary in the House of Lords and announced that the invasion had happened. Now, what has really amazed me about these papers, which have come out today, is how crucial that information I gave them was. First of all, to be honest, I'd forgotten how much detail there was there. Thank heavens it was right. And it really was the basis for pretty much everything they knew in those first hours. It was the only intelligence, it was the only hard information. The chap I was speaking to, Bob McLeod, was not in Portsmouth, he was 50 miles away, but they had a very good VHF link up around the islands, and his information was good. As it turned out, it was spot on. And that is how the day developed.
So that was amateur radio for you in the Falklands crisis. And let's quickly move on because time's running. And here is the some pictures of the Falkland Islands. That's the hospital. That's the war memorial. That's a crowd of us being led by a very good guide. This is, they were very pleased with Maggie Thatcher, and they named a drive after her, and there she is with her stepdad, is up towards the hospital. They've got all their TV comes in by satellite. They've got a government house here, which is a little house there. They've even got the back on my, just hold on. Yes. Right, they've got some old post boxes, telephone boxes, not much in that, so it's not working as far as I'm concerned. And oh yes, this is that's the tax office. That's where it collects all the money from the boats. And this is actually the Penguin News office, which is there. Gives you a flavour and feel for it. So now, leaving the Falkland Islands, one or two other bits and pieces, just some pictures. You've seen some of those. I've repeated some of those. This particular one is rock hoppers. They're rock hopper type penguins, and here they are hopping up the rock. Quite a steep place, and there's some other pictures and some other penguins. This was going back to Saunders Island. You can see whales off there, and you can see them blowing on that.
Did you take this shot yourself, then? Did you take this shot?
Yes. And I took it on this camera. Actually, it's quite difficult taking a movie because, in fact, the disadvantage of this camera is that you're looking at the screen at the back, trying to focus on that. And if the light was bright, which it often was, you can't really see. There is an eyepiece in there, but it's really quite difficult to follow. And if you've got a big camera lens, it's easier it doesn't shake so much. But the software in here is absolutely fantastic because, in fact, it will take handshake and a lot of sort of camera shake out. And often when you're panning across like that, then it doesn't take the shake out until you stop, and then it really stabilizes the whole image, even though you're sort of jittering about. Once it's locked on, it really does. So even with a tiny camera like that, you can take some reasonably good pictures. Here's another one, taken with this camera. Not quite David Attenborough, but it gives you the idea that it was something actually, that chasing around is something the parents, when the youngsters are first being fledged, if you like, they don't cry, so I can't talk about it. But they actually chase them round or chase them out so they can build up their strength. This is actually a rock hopper penguin, and if I'd been quicker, I could have edited out some of this because it's just having a good scratch and so on and so forth here. And also, one thing which you've got a fantastic zoom on here, and I know now that I use it too much. But this gives you some idea. On the left, you will see down to where the rock hoppers come up. And they are in amongst all the albatrosses. So it's quite interesting. And you can see here, actually, just watch closely this, and you'll see it. So it's pretty good zoom. So it shows that I'm lucky to get just at the right time. To get really at the right place. So here's some more, just using a different kind of but then next time we are propping up the beach. The thing about the whole place is that everything is, all the wildlife is totally unscared by human beings. All of it. That's the nice thing about it. Here's another to give you some idea of the shore. It's easy on the beach for them, they can just waddle up, they don't have to jump up or onto the ice, which they do down in Antarctica proper. A very good area, as you can see. Sorry, that's a repeat anyway. Here's some of the king penguins. Now they have much the same colouring as the sorry about that. They have much the same colouring as the emperor penguins, but emperor penguins are up here and these ones are down there. So we never need to see emperor penguins. You get penguins out of it after a bit, but they are fascinating animals. The way they're so gregarious and the way they follow each other and they go around the groups, they really are quite interesting on. Right, let's move on. The next really big surprise, and now we are getting nearer to Antarctica proper, was in fact there's a place called Shag Rocks, and not many people know this place. It's about 6 rocks in fact, and we were lucky enough, and it happens, it's starting to happen regularly. We were in 2020, in January 2020, we saw a super aggregation of whales. That means about 200. These rocks are tiny, only 20 hectares, 49 acres, but they are quite tall. And so here are some pictures. So going from the top, there are the rocks, there are the shags on top of the rocks. here's everybody looking at the whales, and I gave up. The guys with the big cameras were out there, so I retired indoors to the sitting room, the lounge area, and the whales were so many, and they were playing alongside the ship. It was really fascinating. So the funny green colours because of the tinted windows in that particular part of the ship. And you can see them here, it's gradually, you can see them blowing, you can see them diving, you see them, they're humpback whales, you can see them here, and you can see the actual striation marks here, on there. You can see the blowhole on here and on here. You can see some of the mouths, and they've got, they've got these knobbly bits on their mouths as well. So you really, for I don't know, half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, they were just playing around. The only thing I missed, so I was told by my wife who was upstairs, up on the, I didn't hear the sounds that they were making, so I didn't record the sound of those satisfactorily, but I gave up. I couldn't find my way through to the front row. So anyway, the next thing is after Shag Rocks, we approached South Georgia. And South Georgia, in 2016, eradicated its last rats, which were 250 years from when they started. They were taken over when the first ships visited, and they escaped off rats leaving a sinking ship and all that, and they certainly did. And they took over the island. They used to eat all the penguin eggs and so on. It was really, really most unfortunate, and the albatross eggs as well. So one of the things we did was to have to clean our muck boots. We were provided with muck boots, and we had to clean them absolutely, completely clean, because we were all checked before we were allowed to land in South Georgia, because they were also worried about seeds. And I had a backpack and it had some seeds in, and I was nearly kicked off. But fortunately one of the guides took pity on me and helped me, because my eyesight wasn't good enough to see these tiny seeds in the backpack. So they were really worried about grass seeds and things like that getting in and causing the non-local, non-endemic grass. So we had to clean things up and really, and then they brought a dog aboard to see if there was any mice or rats on the. They really took it very serious. Until that was passed, we weren't allowed to go ashore. That gives some idea of the Zodiac boats, how they launched. They had an opening in the side of the ship, which sort of came out like as a platform. Then the boats came alongside and queued up and so on and so forth, and then were zooming off for a landing. So we landed on this is Gritford in South Georgia. Actually, we landed north of that place where Shackleton was beforehand, but sake of speeding up. And that's a whaling station. And you can see Grytviken now, normal population South Georgia 30. But in the summer, a hell of a lot more because of all the tourists. So there's Grytviken. It's an old whaling station. It's got some pretty decrepit bits on that. You can see the old. It's a huge factory, absolutely enormous, and a lot of it is derelict. But the seal pups play around amongst the old propellers and so on. And there they have in the museum technology, a radio, and actually that's the radio, and here's the radio again, but with a radar. Very, very, very early radar, one of the earliest radars. And so that was interesting. There's Shackleton, who was buried here. I won't go that way, it's a long story, as it's a really interesting story of Shackleton, the way he saved pretty well all of his crew. So there's a little church. Remember, normal population, and I think the normal population is probably only mainly in the summer. They don't bother in the winter. It's got a post office, and this whaling thing existed between 1904 and 1965 and managed to kill 175,250 whales during that time, and it only stopped because there wasn't any profit to be made because all the whales that they wanted had died out. And I'll just go back to this. What whales did they want? It's what was called the right whale, a southern right whale. This is a strictly protected, but they still probably was protected towards the end. It was the right size, it didn't knock their boats over too easily, and it had a lot of blubber and oil. And where can we see? Look at these oil tanks. Look at the vast amount of whale oil which they produced. It really was, we think now, pretty criminal. But, you know, it was a real right business. Right, this one hopefully will run. It's asbestos, white asbestos was all over the place, and that's why we couldn't approach some of the buildings closer than that. But didn't worry the little baby seals at all. Didn't worry about it. King penguins on South Georgia, so they were both on Falkland Islands and on South Georgia. Look how gregarious they are, how they all line up. They're better at queuing than we are. This is interesting. This is how they build their nests in the king penguins nest. They use stones. You've probably seen this with David Attenborough on one of his shows. But they really do. This particular one, I didn't get one. There was some where there was a lot of steam. As soon as one penguin's back's turned, another penguin will come in and steal their stones. They're not very friendly from that point of view. This is an interesting video, which the seals here, we were told that they're completely fearless, and we were told never turn your back on a seal. If you're taking a photograph like that, get somebody else to make sure that a seal isn't coming up, or a penguin. They'll come and bite you on the backside. So we were told definitely do that. And this gives you some idea. We had to get across this muddy bit, and you go slow in mud, and the seal's a lot quicker than you are. So it could have been quite dangerous from the point of view, from that point of view. Here's some more, gives you some idea of all these penguins and how sort of unusual and unnatural it sort of seems to everybody from that point of view. And the blue little cones are, penguins have right of way. If we're walking, we have to avoid their tracks, but they have their, you look at the queue of them, we have to avoid, you can't walk through the queue, because they don't like that. So, and also because, you know, if you're a good supporter of nature and all the rest, then you shouldn't do it. Here's, now I'm moving a bit, moving on a bit, they're really nice to these things. They have people on the side, but we went sightseeing once, they can put boats so you can look for, put seats so you can look forward. So we moved on to a place called Deception Island, which is fantastically different again. And Deception Island is a volcano. This is actually, you'd think it's an island if you sail round, because it's not until you get to this relatively small inlet that you realise that it's not. It's got a lake in the middle of it, or it's got the sea which goes into the lake. And it's really interesting. It's volcanic. This bit says, well, 1969, I think. Scientific stations in 1967-69. It's the caldera, that's the collapsed volcano part of the island, and it seriously damaged some stations. And here it is from Google Earth. You can look at it on Google Earth. And here's some pictures. Here is approaching, going back outside, approaching back here, and actually this is looking over here. I thought we'd arrived, so I took a photograph, but that's all it was. And we had to go further round, and I couldn't get in a good position for a good photograph. But when we got inside on the right-hand side, when we were floating, whaling station again. So, but they're unfortunately also defunct. So we went for a walk. Here's Jill, my wife. We went for a walk up here, and I'll show you a picture, because I got into trouble on this walk, and quite rightly too, because we walked along the side of what was a mountain of volcanic ash, and okay, it's reasonably solid, but in a moment you'll see that if you went too near the edge of this, it could have broken away, and if it broke away, it took you with it. There was no way you were going to get out again. So, and I got quite rightly in trouble, but we'll move on. So, that's the same picture going out. Here we are. Here's the no close-ups of. There was another ship boat which is there in front of these oil tanks here. This is where we walked along this edge, and you can see one party walking ahead, and I was standing obviously away from here, and somewhere you can probably see there's a blue cone. You're not allowed to go past the blue cone. Well, they haven't got a blue cone where I walked to, and I did admit walk too close, and I got pulled out by the guy, Bruce, who's a really good glaciologist. But here's what one would end up in if you fall over the edge. And here is a video that I took, taking my life into my own hands. You can see what it's like. So it's stunningly beautiful, but very dangerous in places. So we moved on to the next bit, which is to the British Port Lockroy retired research station. It's we'll see it, it's a museum. And we also went past and visited, very friendly thing to do, the Argentinian Almirante Brown. And Brown is Brown, although from Argentina, because he was an expat Brit, or maybe Scot, but he was an expat and became, because Argentina is really quite a young country in terms of the population. Now, we were working our way down to Port Lockroy here, and it's a tiny little island. This is the British Port Lockroy. The scale, look at the scale. It's only about 250, 200, maybe 170 meters across, a tiny island in this place. But we didn't get there first. We went via the Argentinian, which was over to the right, which is the eastern side, about, 30 kilometers away. We motored and we came to this Argentinian Brown station, and you can see it here, and we were allowed off, and those who were, well, I went part of the way up here, but the really brave ones went all the way, look at the bottom, went all the way up to the top here, and some of them, and I was very jealous. Remember, I'd broken my leg skiing, and they came down on their muck boots, skiing down. There was one or two expert skiers just skiing down on the boots. I was very, very jealous of on that, but my wife, this is Jill, my wife coming down from higher up, and I was fairly high up there. But anyway, the research base, it had some interesting radio masts, which you can see in various places, and I actually took a photograph of what kind of dipole they were using for HF transmission. They had a little nostalgia platform with everything, place names pointing to their favourite place names on there. So, and they were very friendly. They were really very friendly. There's a little bit of gung-ho. I couldn't translate the Spanish very well, but a little bit of gung-ho here. But the top plaque on this shed, I thought it was the loo at first, but apparently it wasn't. It was still in the shed. The actual had a plaque to Romanian biologist. Goodness knows why, but obviously famous for that. The next thing we went to was Port Knockroy. Now I'm going to run this video because this gives you a good idea of what it's all about. But here we are, as the good old penguins again, living under the huts. So you can see them under the huts. That's where they live. That's the museum we went to do. We had to queue to get on only so many at a time because there wasn't enough room. Again, it's a reason they don't go in too big a party. You can see it in a minute. I'll be close up of the weather station. That's the weather station on the top. Sorry about the wind. That's the one thing I didn't find out till afterwards. There is a wind suppression of the software, if you like, on the camera, which I should have switched on, and I would have got more of the seals and less of the wind noise. Now, Port Knockroy has been in the news. How many people have seen the news about the snow at Port Knockroy? It's a post office museum and ex-research station, and notice a team from HMS Protector. Remember that name in the Falkland Islands. And this is Sunday's news. And the Royal Navy digs out world's most remote post office, and indeed it is a post office. So Antarctic snow, right. Okay, a little bit of detail on there. Here's them digging out the roof, all the snow on the roof there, you can see at the back. And here is the four girls who man the post office and museum in the summer. And then there's the Navy crew behind with their protector ship there. Now, this was, for me, as it said a little bit earlier, the highlight of the whole trip. It really was. Here is actually, going back a bit, coming into the tiny island, Goody Island, Port Knockroy. So, after I queued to go to the museum, I went in and left. This is the kind of thing they had to live with back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, and so on. Here's your bath, propped up against the wall. There's one tap. There's no running hot water. So, anyway. So, yes, there was a little storeroom in there with some bits and pieces. And then I went into the next room and I got the shock of my life. This machine was pride of place in the middle of the room. And it is called the Beastie. It is, as we'll see in a minute, an ionosonde. We'll see that in a minute. And that completely freaked me almost. Well, I'll tell you why. In 1966-ish, I wanted to do a part-time PhD at the University of Surrey, and so, I wanted to do a part-time PhD, and I found that if I went on the British Antarctic Survey, I wasn't married then, went on the British Antarctic Survey, then I would be able to do a PhD in 2 years and do the research on that. And I would have worked on that kind of machine, not necessarily in Port Lafroy, but actually because the timing was wrong. Because that machine wasn't used after, well, the dates are on the next slide, I don't remember the exact date, but it certainly wasn't usable. That machine is for measuring the ionosphere, which is the electron mirror in the sky, which you bounce signals off to get shortwave to go right around the world. And that was to measure it down in there. And that's what I might well have worked on, albeit not probably there, but you'll see later. So renewed interest, and I saw sort of lots of other things. Ooh, one of these shells, or it's actually more there, there's a load of radio valves on there. There was a load of sort of weird equipment. Then I saw this in the next room, and that is a radio receiver called a CR100. And I used to have one of that, and I had the Navy version, which was in this colour, which had a thing called a radar interference suppressor on the left-hand side, which you tuned in if you were on your ship and the radar pulses were interfering. You could blank them out from that in that way. And then I saw this oscilloscope, this kind of thing I used in my first days at Phillips, or Mallard Research Laboratories, was a BCT221 frequency meter. I used to have one of those in my early days as a radio amateur, and so on and so forth. And here is actually the one, I had one of those, but here's the one which is non-Navy type. It has a field strength meter instead of the radar interference suppressor on that one. So that was the radio room. So that also might have been something I would have done there to send the results of the ionosonde over by radio. I might have been a radio operator. So the radio room, this is the radio room, and lots of other things in there which I haven't put in, and it obviously was the main thing. Now, it mentions here the BBC World Service was here, and that would be received on a shortwave radio, for example, here. And another for ordinary listening. The only problem was that when this thing was switched on for about 5 to 10 minutes, every hour or, between the hour and 10 or a quarter past, it would completely blank out because it was sending big radar pulses up, and it would blank out the BBC. So there was a little internal battle if someone's favourite programme was coming on the BBC overseas service. So this was the machine. It's called a Union radio made of Mark III ionosonde. Here's a picture of it, and here's it sends up about a kilowatt of pulses to a couple of aerials up through the top of it. Really ancient technology. And some of the bits, this is the tuning system. A motor would be used to sweep the frequency over the shortwave band, which of interest, and various other bits and resistors on the side, and a little oscilloscope to also view the responses. And here are the kind of responses one would get from that. Here's the kind of picture you could have either on a piece of paper printed out or actually directly on the scope. And here is actually on a winter island in Argentine, serial number 22 at Argentine Island. And it's called the Beastie, and the panels were on this particular one were somewhat decorated, and there's an engineer actually mending it. So that was quite something. The Argentine Islands, which that one was on, is shown here, and here we are. Okay, there's not much. Yes, the link here is right at the bottom. That was the hut which was there. The original hut, down at the bottom it says, the original hut was destroyed in 1946, possibly by tsunami. Now that is probably one of the dangers of which we were warned about. That tsunami, mini tsunamis, when there is a glacier next to the sea, and because of global warming it's collapsing, a great chunk of ice comes off, and if you're in a bay and the glacier's on the other side, it will set up a mini tsunami by collapsing to the sea. A wave will cross the whole bay, and if you're trying to land at the time that happened on the opposite side of the bay, you will be hit by a tsunami. So we were told when we landed in our Zodiacs, you had to run at least 25 meters up the beach, up to a decent height, so that the mini tsunami would not capture you So that really was a danger. Now, Jill and I, my wife and I, didn't go on. There was an opportunity to camp on an island, and it was quite interesting. This island, and then the loos were dug at the island. They were facing the ship, but fortunately the ship went round the corner, and so we couldn't use telephoto lenses to photograph people in the loo. But anyway, but people who were on this island camping, they said they couldn't sleep a wink because all night there was great crashes and bangs of little mini the ice crashing into the sea. So global warming to them meant a sleepless night. It really was quite interesting from that point. So just the last thing, the hairy landings. This is kind of thing you may want to try and get your little Zodiac through. Here's one stuck around the corner, and you may have to get in the water and haul your mini icebergs out of the way so you can get through and push it through here. And they really were hairy landings. We'll come up with, the penguins were there anyway. And here's, I'll show you. Here's the queue of people waiting to get off and trying to get through there. I was lucky. I was in the boat. Actually, the final boat couldn't get in to get off on that occasion. And actually, somewhere there's a little pile of stuff. They always took a day's food in case you got stuck because of this kind of effect. They always had so you would have to camp for a night or until the pack ice had disappeared. But here's a little picture of the penguins right at that spot, and they were another hazard. Remember, they have right of way. So here they are, they're marching up and down, marching up the thing. The landing point is at the far distance, just behind the chapters of the time. So that gives you some idea of what it was like. Okay, now back to the little bit of science quickly to round off. ESA Satellite Sentinel-2 here is the arch photographer of penguin poo. Penguin poo enables new emperor penguin colonies to be found. And here was a brown patch, a little tiny brown patch, which hadn't been registered before. And to give you some idea, I put in a picture. This is what the snow becomes like when there's penguin poo around. So that's the penguins on the top there, but here's what it's like. And so that here is the red spots, discovered and rediscovered colonies of the previously known. And there are quite a number of red spots around discovered by satellite in that way. So that's pretty interesting. The next thing, ice cores can be used to detect climate change. Here we are. Here's an ice core which has been picked out. Here is the way of the drill which is set up, portable, transportable at least, which winch and etc. etc. And these are the ice cores and the kind of density, or you can use light, but it's basically the trapped gases, and CO2 is the most important of the gases, but also the other impurities. And these core records date to 123,000 years in Greenland, and in Antarctica, which we are 800,000 years. So anyway, here's ending up. Antarctica and climate change. Antarctica contains more than 90% of the world's ice and 70% of our planet's fresh water. If all the world ice melted, the sea would rise 70 meters, 230 feet. We'll see a slide on the link which I've given there. 1 degree C rise in sea temperatures gives 2.3 meters rise in level. But it does take 200 years, so it's not instantaneous. So slightly good news, but followed by bad news. Clear day, the sun warms sea by 1 kilowatt per meter per square meter. Aerosols, CFCs, will actually lower this, will lower by, the CFCs contribute 2 watts per meter squared. So it's quite small against a kilowatt. It's small, but it's actually crucial. It's the ozone hole that's really these CFCs are bad for, old refrigerated gases. And the ozone hole is still shrinking. CO2 really is the worst culprit. So it is important for us to get our CO2 down. But there's a lot of uncertainty, unfortunately. Other factors of it. East Antarctic, the picture, I'll show a picture again in a minute. That's the one, a bigger area. If all that ice sheet melted, the sea would rise 53.3 meters. However, if the West Antarctic ice sheet melted, which is the one which is melting, the sea would rise 3.3 meters. Level of snow in flat parts of Antarctica rise by up to 1 meter per year. So there's a compensating effect by up to 80%. So it's not all bad news. Things are not as bad as one might think. Sea level between 1993 and 2018 contributed thermal expansion of 42%. Yes, okay, 40% of it wasn't very big. It's still on the next slide, a few tens of centimeters. Thermal expansion, temperate glaciers melted 21%, Greenland glaciers melting 15%, Antarctica only 8%. So don't blame Antarctica. It's not their fault. So anyway, sea level rise, you can look at, actually, I don't know if I click on that. on. That's the important one. I can't stop it. Actually, it's gone too far.
This real-life lore video is sponsored by the
Plain
upcoming
silly
film
watches.
Inconvenience
We'll move
Sequel.
on.
You've probably heard news at some point in your life that the Earth is warming, and as a result, the Arctic ice is melting. There is no debate that Earth is warming up. The planet's average temperature has increased 1.1 degrees Celsius since 1880, and 16 out of 17 of the hottest years ever on record have been since 2001. NASA estimates there is a 90...
Got it. Right. So you can look at that. It's sea level rise effectively. You can just look it up. You didn't even remember the URL for that. So most of the melting, East Antarctica, West Antarctica, which is melting now, is not so dangerous for us. Here is actually the figures which show that on there. Here is total mass loss from peak reservoir. This is more figures in which actually look up later, but Pine Island is the, well, where's Pine Island? This glacier is the one which is the biggest worry at the moment. I put in some other figures. Here's the global sea level fluctuation. It's not that great. You know, it's not fast. But going back, this map, this is now, that is in the past, and sea level has been a hell of a lot higher in the past than it is now. And thousands of years ago, this is since the last glacial minimum, this is reversed the other way, so this is now, that is the past. And it has been rising, yes it has been rising. It's fairly flat at the moment, but with a constant slope, and that is what is shown here at the moment. So, to finish, science and technology of Antarctica. Well, Antarctica is really out of this world. It's fantastic, the most challenging place, continent, etc. Challenges will actually be very useful for science and world technology. And Antarctic, excuse me, when you look at the figures, it's actually slowing the rest of the chain. It'll take 2,000 years for Antarctica to melt. So, it slows change, but it's also a marker for it. So, any questions?
Can I go back to the beginning? Just going back to the beginning when you said Antarctica's a lot colder. You know, this last September, October, we were in the Arctic Circle at Svalbard and I was in shorts and t-shirts. Why is Antarctica so much colder than the Arctic?
Right. Why is Antarctica much colder than the Arctic? And Pat was in t-shirts, but
in the Arctic Circle.
In the Arctic Circle.
Yeah, and I even had back in a hot tub.
Yeah, it's mainly because the vast amount of water. There's an awful lot more to melt than there is up in the Arctic, and there really is. It's a huge amount of water. There's not very much in the Arctic. I mean, the Russians will be sailing across the Arctic in 5 years' time.
What about the height? Does that have a big impact on it? I mean, after all, if you go to the Alps, as you go up, you get the...
Remember the Antarctic, 9,000 feet in the middle. The Arctic's nowhere near that.
Yeah.
Nowhere near that. It's a huge difference. Vastly difference.
Thank you.
How does Antarctica slow climate change?
How does it?
Yeah.
Because of its vast, it's a vast thermal sink, and it takes a lot of heat to melt so much water. It's an awful lot of heat.
Okay, two questions I made. One is, you showed that picture of Port Lockroy and Marines digging the snow off the roof or something.
Yes.
But surely it's their summer at the moment, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. But
So
it's
what's it
early
like in
summer.
winter?
Well, it's not occupied in the winter.
But doesn't it just get splashed to, I don't know?
No.
No?
Less snow.
No, it's in a bay. It's very well protected, actually, although it's in the middle of a sort of bay, and so the winds sort of don't really bash it at all. It's very well protected. The Port Lockroy is very well protected.
Okay. Question two, if I may. You mentioned the 50-year treaty, but I think you said that was signed in 1962?
61.
Sorry, a 50-year treaty in 61. So hasn't it expired? Not they doing? I mean, what's
It's coming up.
Well,
Well,
sure,
it's come up.
it came up.
1961, 50 years.
What?
You said it was 1961 in your slide.
61, yes.
Yeah, and 50 years.
It's gone already.
Yeah.
It's gone already.
Yeah.
Well, people have been busy sort of bought elsewhere.
That's a good sign then, is it? I mean, it's fairly stable.
It is fine. Fingers crossed this will carry on. It's a good point.
Any other questions?
A little bit confused about at the beginning. You showed a picture or a graphic of Antarctic with no ice on, and you saw
Yes.
land mass.
Yes.
Would that be underwater, or was that?
What was
I
shown?
thought it was confusing me.
No, good question again. But what was shown was if all the ice melted and the sea level, which wouldn't be, it would be about 50 metres higher, or at least 50 to 70 metres higher. That's what you would see above the sea level. 1/3 of the area would be above that sea level, and that's it. So does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So no other questions then?
Well,
Oh, yeah.
rather bizarre question, but apparently a few weeks, months ago, magnetic north lined up precisely with true north. Do you know whether magnetic south did the same thing?
Very good question. I meant to look it up. The South Pole is actually, for some time, been off out of the Antarctic area, the continent. It was actually the South Magnetic Pole.
Oh, I see.
And was nowhere near, 1,000 miles different. So yes, it wobbles around, and actually it's every, I forget how many thousand years it is, it completely collapses. So it'll be there'll be another interesting thing in about 5,000 years, I think.
Just a comment actually, there's a really good movie, Edmonton, you probably saw it on the boat, but it's on the BBC iPlayer, and it actually covers when he went there, and basically all the measurements they did to find out were they there using sextants and stuff like that. They didn't really rely on
The old history of what was it, not Shackleton?
No, it was Edmonton when he went. Yeah, and he even covered the Fram boats and everything else.
So the BBC, it's on the BBC archive,
it was on the iPlayer, and we definitely saw it maybe less than a month ago. So it's probably still on there.
It's still up there.
Yeah. But it's a relatively recent movie, by the way.
Okay, well, you started by saying that this trip had always been on your bucket list. For someone who's really looking forward to March, I don't think it's actually on my bucket list, but I think that was a fascinating place to visit. So perhaps you'd all join me in thanking Mike for telling us about this trip. Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a safe trip home.